Hey, I'm Victor Stepanoff. I'll be guiding you through this Blender tutorial. Today, we're going to be learning how to run Blender from the command line. Now, if you've never worked with the command line, don't worry. This video is for you. I'll be going over the basics of how to work with the command line. I'll also share some concepts that will help you understand what we're doing with the command line. This video is for Linux users. If Linux is not your primary operating system, check out my other two videos for Windows users and macOS users. I'll provide a link in the description. In this video, we'll be looking at why you would want to run Blender from the command line, how you would do it, and I'll also share some examples of how to do this. So, why would you want to run Blender from the command line? We don't have to search for the answer because the Blender developers have provided the answer for us in the documentation. So under Advanced Command Line and Introduction, they state a number of use cases that you would want to use Blender running from the command line. The very first one is rendering an animation. You might think that you could do this with Blender running, sure, but you might want to automate this process. The second part is automation and batch processing. You can write Python scripts that could process files and assets really quickly without you having to do it by hand. So this is a good way to run those scripts. Also, Python development is the third use case. When working on a Python script, you would usually print out messages for yourself to understand where the script is or maybe some error that's going on. And the print statements will go into the command line that you've launched Blender from. Maybe Blender exits unexpectedly, and to find out what's going on, if you ran Blender from the command line, you could see some output, maybe errors or warnings that happen before Blender crashes. Sometimes the Blender developers, if you're helping troubleshoot an issue with them, they'll ask you to run from the command line and get extra logs. So how do we run from a command line? Well, let's take a step back and look at what you can actually do with a command line. Primary things that we usually would do with a command line is navigating the file system and then launching some commands or some programs. Navigating the file system is the same thing as you would do in your file manager. On Windows, it's Explorer, on Mac, it's Finder, and then a Linux version of that is the thing that you would use to navigate the file system by hand through a graphical user interface. But with the command line, you'll do this with the terminal without having any GUI. Launching and running a program is this exact same thing as clicking on the icon of the program that you want to launch. But this happens without the icon, and you just do it with a keyboard through the terminal. Files usually divide into programs that you can execute and then some data files. For example, the programs are Blender, your favorite browser, and so on. And the data files are the Blender project, maybe some MP4s, and so on. Just as there are rules when we speak English, you have to put words in particular order so people would understand you. The same thing goes on a command line. You have to put the command in a particular order so the computer will understand you. For example, you have to first put the name of the program that you want to execute, and then followed by a list of command line arguments. For example, here you can see that we have Blender as the program that we want to launch. And then next we have a number of command line arguments that tell Blender to run in background mode, to use the file.blend project file, and then to render the 10th frame. So what are command line arguments? Think of them as preferences that you can set in the Blender's preference menu. You can set these checkboxes and input different values to configure Blender. The same thing goes with command line arguments. You can configure Blender using those. There are three primary types of command line arguments: flag arguments, arguments with values, and then positional arguments. Flag arguments are the same as checkboxes in the preferences. Either it's enabled or disabled. So if you put the flag in the arguments on the command line, it means that you're enabling this flag, similar as you would enable the checkbox for some setting that you want to enable. Arguments with values are again similar as preferences with values. You specify them and then you give a particular value that you want Blender to apply to that setting. Some arguments need to be placed at a particular location in the arguments list for the program to understand them. For example, Blender has a number of arguments that would affect Blender itself, and then you would specify the project file that you want to work on, and then maybe some values that would override the settings in the project file. For example, using another render engine, or maybe rendering some frame, or maybe using some other image output format. Now let's take a closer look at the arguments that Blender provides us. Again, you can find them in the documentation for Blender under Advanced Command Line and Command Line Arguments. I'll put a link in the description for you. This page specifies all the command line arguments that you could specify for Blender, and gives you good documentation explaining how you can use these arguments and for what purpose. Also note that there are two ways of specifying this particular flag. Remember, I was talking about flag arguments. This is exactly a flag argument, telling Blender to run in the background without booting the UI. This is an example of an argument with value, stating the argument name and then having some value followed by that argument. Notice that some of these arguments are going to have a short version, so this is a shorthand. Instead of typing out this whole word, you can just type out B and Blender would understand you. Note some of these arguments will be capitalized if they're using just one letter. I would highly encourage you to go through this page and look at some command line arguments that you could use for yourself. We'll look at some of them in the example section of this video. The Blender developers have provided us some examples of how to render from the command line. There's a web page, I'll link it in the description as well, where you can take a look at the examples. So if we scroll down, we can see some examples. And for example, if you want to render a single image, this would be the command that you would run. And the Blender developers have provided us the commentary of what exactly this command does. In this particular case, we are running Blender without the UI. Then we're loading this particular blend file project, and then we're rendering only the 10th frame. Make sure to check out this documentation for more examples. Make sure to give this video a like if you're getting value from this video and learning something new. Alright, let's take a look at how to launch Blender from the terminal. I'll be using Rocky Linux for this particular demo. The process will be the same regardless of what Linux distro you're using. The only things that might be different are the programs that we're going to be running, for example, the name of the terminal and the way that the file browser looks. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to navigate to the location where Blender is installed. I'm going to open my file browser, and I've installed Blender in my software folder in my home folder. So this is the folder that contains my Blender install. So if I launch this, Blender will start. And we need to open our terminal. To open up the terminal, you can hit the system key and start typing in terminal, and then hit enter as soon as the terminal program pops up. Depending on your distro, the name of this terminal might be different. So if you're not getting any hits for the name terminal, go ahead and Google what command line is used on your particular Linux distro. So the thing that we need to do here is we need to navigate to Home, Software, and the Blender folder. Notice that there's a tilde here. This signifies that I'm currently in the home folder of my file system. You can get the full path to where we are by typing in pwd, so print working directory, and that will display where we are. Also, your terminal might write out the path above right here, or even right here next to the active prompt. So let's navigate to Home, Software. But we are already in Home, so the tilde key represents that. So we would need to use the cd command for change directory and type in Software. Also, tab works here, so autocomplete will autocomplete the next folder that is here. So I'm going to type in BL and then hit tab again, because that's the only folder in the software folder right now. And now I'm going to hit enter, and now I'm in the folder where Blender is. To list all the files in this particular folder, I can type in the ls command. It will list all the files that you'll see in your file manager right here. To get a nice list, you could also type in ls-l. So the -l flag creates a nice list for us, like so. If you're getting a lot of text in your terminal, a good way to clear it up is by typing in clear and then hitting enter. And this will clear all the output that's accumulated over all your command runs. Also, another way to get to the Blender folder is by navigating to where your Blender is, and most file managers will have an option for you to launch the terminal right in this folder. So in my case, I can click here and there'll be an option open in terminal, which I can do, and I'll be located exactly where I want to be. So you can see that the full path is right here. Type pwd to prove that, right? Depending again on your Linux distro, this might be a bit different. So if you don't see any options, try right-clicking in the folder itself, or just Google that question as how to open the terminal in the file manager of whatever distro you're running. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start running Blender. So I'm going to clear everything. So I'm going to type period and then Blender. It's very important to tell exactly what file you're going to be launching or what command you're going to be running. So the period indicates that I'm going to be accessing a file that is in the current folder, and I'm just going to hit enter and then launch Blender. And as you can see, that launches Blender from the command line. All right. Also, like, you could actually use cd and then ... This will go back one folder. So I'm going to be in the software folder. And now that I'm in that folder, I can go and now I can type in period and then Blender folder and then Blender this way. So now I can launch Blender from the software folder in particular. All right. Let's go back into the Blender folder, clear everything. Remember, I showed you the list of command line arguments that Blender has, and to get the full list from the terminal itself, you can type in Blender and then --help. So you'll hit enter, and that will give you the full list of all the arguments that you can provide to Blender on the command line. As you can see, there's quite a number of them. And again, this is not as well formatted as you'll see on the web page that I've showed you before, but this is a nice quick way to get a list of these command line arguments if you forgot how to spell them. And again, remember that you can have also a short way to write this particular command. So for help, I can clear this again, and then instead of typing in help, I can use -h, and that will give me the same result. As you can see, I got the documentation again. All right, let's clear that. And also notice that you can repeat commands that you have entered before by using the up arrow and just cycle through all the commands that you've typed in. It's a really nice feature. Now I want to open up a blend file from the command line. So as soon as I run Blender, I want Blender to open that particular blend file. I have an example one in my home folder and in the temp folder. So this right here. So this is home temp, and let's write out that command. So I need to type in Blender again, and then I'm using that tilde to say that the file that I want to use is in my temp and is in my home folder, then temp, and then my project. And as soon as I hit enter, this will open up Blender and that particular blend file. All right, that opened up Blender and that particular project. Also notice if I go back into the terminal, first of all, you can see that there's some output getting printed out. This is nice. You can add more logging, more detailed logging, and this will help maybe narrow some issues that you're having or see some warnings. Maybe you're providing some feedback to the Blender developers and they requested you to give them some logs. So you can see that right here. And notice I've launched the Blender through this particular terminal. And as soon as I hit this escape, so quitting out of the terminal, it will kill the Blender application as well. So let's do just that. And you can see that Blender disappeared as soon as I did that. Now let's take a look at some of the other command line arguments. So let's go back into Home, Software, and then I'm going to launch terminal again like so. I'm actually going to create another tab for us right here in this folder for referencing the help. So I'm going to type in help, and I'm going to be looking for the window option. So the window geometry option. I want to set the particular resolution that I want to start Blender with. So I got to scroll up. So window options right here. And we're going to be using this window geometry command line argument. And notice it has 4 values that we need to provide. So these are going to be the coordinates where of the lower left corner, as it says in the doc. And then this is going to be the width and height. So let's do that. This is the long version. This is the short version of that command line argument. I'm going to go back, switching to that other tab. Type in Blender, and then 0, 0, and let's go with 800 by 600. And as soon as I hit enter, Blender will start at the left corner with that particular resolution. And you can see, of course, this is not really great resolution to work with Blender, but you can see that you can specify a particular resolution, maybe like full HD or something that you need. I'm going to quit out of that. I'm going to clear this. Also, I can repeat that command and use that shorthand. So let's do that. I think it was -P. Let me double check. So yeah, -P. And then let's go with 1920 by 1080. And look at that. Now Blender is a bit bigger. All right. And now let's do a final thing and combine that resolution in our project file. So this will not only set the resolution and the position of the window, but it will also open that project. All right. Okay, now let's take a look at how to render from the command line without booting Blender's UI. So let's take a look at the documentation again, and we will need the background mode right here. So it renders without the UI, and then we will need to set the frame that we want to render, right? So we'll be specifying our example project, and then I'll use -F. Let's do that right now. So with this command, I'm telling Blender to start in background mode, so without the UI, open up this particular project, and then render a single frame, so render the 100th frame. So let's hit enter, and the rendering should start without the UI appearing. Okay, our render is done, and it's saved that particular frame right here. And let's navigate there and open and take a look. To save time, you can actually open this folder in the file manager by typing in Stylus and then temp. Again, this might not be the same command that you'll need to run in your particular Linux distro. If this command doesn't work for you, try to Google how to open a folder from the terminal in your particular distro. I'm going to hit enter, and you can see that here is the image right here. And if you're interested, I have a tutorial that goes over how to create this particular animation using a Python script in Blender. So if you're interested, check that out. Another use case of the terminal is to take a look at the output of Python scripts. So let's start Blender, and let's navigate into the scripting workspace. So scroll to the right here, scripting, then new. Now let's type in the print command. So that should be good enough. And as soon as I run this, we'll see the print statement right here. So let me run the script. So the script ran, and now we can go back and check the terminal. All right, the main idea here is when you're developing Python scripts, you want to look at where your script is at the current point in time. So maybe it's doing some exports, or maybe it's processing this particular image or geometry or something else, right? So you can make your development life easier by looking at what exactly your script is doing. So maybe some error output, or maybe you forgot a closing parenthesis and you want to check out the error. So let me run that. And now we can go back and we can get the full error right here in the terminal. You can also run Python scripts on startup. So let's go back into the documentation and scroll to the Python section. And we will be using this particular command line argument. We'll provide the file path to our script. So if you remember, I had a script in my temp folder right here. So I'm going to be launching this particular script, and I'm going to be using this P or Python command line argument. So let's do that. Again, I'm specifying the home folder. And now as soon as I run this, this will launch Blender and execute this particular script on startup. And here it is. And if you're interested in this particular scene, I have a separate tutorial going over the Python script that generates this particular scene. So if you're interested, check that out. Okay, and the final thing I want to show you is how to create a custom shell script that will execute Blender with particular command line arguments. So let's navigate into the Blender folder, and I'll be creating a shell script right here that'll launch Blender and provide particular command line argument. So we're already in that folder right here, and I'm going to use the touch command and create a run blender.sh file. So this would create a new file. You can take a look by doing ls, and you can see that we have run blender sh right here. Notice that these are the permissions right here that define what you can do with this particular file. Notice that there is no x, so x is for execute. So we can, for example, execute Blender, right? But we can only read and write this particular file. We'll update this in just a minute. So we can do that with change mod and plus x, and then this run blender sh. I'm going to hit enter, and now if we list that file list, we can see that x has appeared, and now we can execute this. But it doesn't really have anything at this point because we haven't edited just yet. So let me edit this file. So I'm going to use gedit. And this opens up a notepad-like program, and I'm going to type in Blender, and this will launch Blender. I want to use some other arguments. For example, in the MISC options, I want to use the factory startup. So it starts up with the factory settings. And let's also set the geometry of Blender. So -p, 0, 0, and then let's save it. So now when we run this particular script, it's going to set these particular command line arguments, and it's going to launch Blender. So we save it, let's exit. Now we can run it from here, but we can also run it from the file manager, like so. And we've executed Blender, and the terminal is right here. So, all right. Before I summarize what we learned here today, I want you to recall 3 things that you learned from this video. You could write them down on a piece of paper, say them out loud, or maybe write them in the comments. This will help you start to solidify the knowledge you've gained today. So go ahead and pause the video now and try to recall at least 3 things. All right, to take your learning to the next level, if you've been following along, close the terminal that you have open and try to navigate to Blender using the terminal on your own without looking back in the video. And if you haven't been following along, here's your chance to start applying the knowledge you gained today. All right, to summarize what we learned here today, we learned why you would want to run Blender from the command line. We learned how to format the command on the command line. We learned about what command line arguments are, and then we took a look at how you can do this in practice. All right, if you have any questions about this topic, make sure to ask them in the comments below. For more tutorials like this or Blender Python tutorials, make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.